Hey everybody, welcome back to Live, Laugh, Lies. It's your host, Susie, and today we have a very exciting guest, Dr. Drew Curtis, who is a psychologist, PhD, and an author, has multiple books out about lying. So if you guys are interested, check those out. But we have a really cool interview. I'm really excited that we got to talk to him. He's located in Texas, so we zoomed him in. As you guys know, I have a history of dating people that lied to me, and it provided some of the inspiration to this show. So really, we have a lot to be thankful for here, because without them, we may not be sitting in the Live, Laugh, Lies era of Susie Evans. So we had to bring on a lying expert, and I asked a lot of you guys on social media for your input and like what you guys wanted to know. And so I think I got almost every single question answered, whether it was at that point in the interview or throughout it. It's a juicy interview. It's really interesting. I think I'm an easy target for people, or I used to be. I'm not anymore, but I used to be an easy target for people, for narcissists, for liars, for people like that, because I want to give people the benefit of the doubt. I want to love people, and I want to believe the best in people. And when people lie, it's been hard in my past to be able to like stand up to them, because it's like I'm so unfamiliar with liars. As you'll hear in the podcast, I feel like I was raised in a very honest home where I was encouraged to tell the truth, even if it was hard. And so, yeah, this was just an interview that really touched my heart, if you will. It really spoke to me. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Dr. Drew Curtis.
Everyone just wants to live, laugh, love. But in this disappointing world, there are many who are faced with lies. This is Live, Laugh, Lies.
Dr. Drew Curtis, welcome to Live, Laugh, Lies. I'm so excited that you're here. On this podcast, we've dove into so many wild, interesting stories about deception, lying, cheating, scandals, cults. Like, we really don't have anything that's off limits here, but we've never had an expert in lying on. So I'm really excited to pick your brain today.
It's about time we brought a lying expert onto this show. After the many deeply upsetting and shocking stories that have been shared throughout our time together on this podcast, I think I can speak on behalf of all of us when I say we needed this. I just love this for us.
You are essentially an expert in lying, deception, and pathological behaviors. Can you give us some insight into how you got into this field and what sparked your interest originally?
Absolutely. And once again, thanks for having me here, and I look forward to our time together today. So my background, I'm a counseling psychologist, licensed psychologist. So I studied clinical counseling psychology throughout my doctoral studies. And really how I got into it was throughout my studies, I had some clinical cases where two that come to mind, essentially, that where patients weren't forthcoming. They were lying to me, and didn't really know how to deal with that at the time. Took that back to professors and really didn't get much training on it. And it's not a knock to my professors or my institution. Really, the field of clinical counseling psychology kind of had this hole in research and literature on, how do you deal with lying within counseling and therapy sessions. So that really sparked my interest into looking at that area further. I teach at a university, teach classes on psychopathology, which are essentially psychological disorders. So really my interest in lying in therapy, lying in healthcare, lying in relationships became merged with psychological disorders. And I found another hole that was on pathological lying, where there's a group of people that their lying is so much and causes them so many problems, but the field has not yet recognized that as a psychological disorder. So the bulk of my work more recently has been focused on that, trying to help my field recognize this as a legitimate or formal diagnosis, so that way we can move forward to helping these individuals who are struggling.
That's so interesting. So there's no diagnosis for pathological liars? And is that just a term that we've created as a society?
Well, yes and no. I mean, some of the no, there is not a formal diagnosis for pathological lying. As a society, that's one of the things I found real interesting was that pop culture had discussed pathological or compulsive lying much more extensively than the psychological community or the scientific community. So it's as if pop culture was way ahead of where we were in the field. But it was fragmented, right? Because in pop culture, we'll use these terms, we'll use it around times of politics, politicians, we'll use it in a variety of contexts and not fully understand what it means. So my passion was what I did was dig back up some of the prominent figures in psychiatry and psychology who wrote pretty extensively about pathological lying. It just kind of fell out of favor in after 1915 to about 1980s. No one really discussed it, and that's the time in the field where the book we use for diagnosing the DSM started to develop, and it never was included. So that's one of my big interests. In the practical interest, I'll say there's people who struggle and they're reaching out on forums and blogs for help. I'll say since I've been doing my work and publishing things, I've had more and more people reaching out via email, phone calls, just looking for help. They come across my work, they say, this is so helpful. How can we get more help? Sadly, the field's not where it should be yet.
So do you feel that your books and your work resonates more with people that struggle with lying or people that have the effects of people that are lying to them?
I think both. And that's the goal. The goal is to help, and it does resonate. I'll get a mix of both. I'll get people who struggle with lying that reach out to me, and they say help. They say, they've read my books, they've read my work, they've come across podcasts like these, and they say, what you spoke to made so much sense and resonated so much with me. Now, how do I get help? And that's the sad part where I have to say, unfortunately, you want this help, but we don't recognize it yet as a formal diagnosis. But I've also had people on the other shoe, parents, children, adult children, significant relationships where people reach out to me and say, I need help with my significant other, I need help with my child. And so it's people who are on the receiving end, as you mentioned. So it's both parties that are reaching out.
Interesting. To kind of kick things off, what is a common misconception that people have about liars or lying in general that you'd love to set straight?
There are several. I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and this has been looked at in a lot of research, even cross-cultural, across-the-world research, most of the time we have a lot of false beliefs about lying behavior, or when people lie, what do they do? And one of the most common beliefs held across the world is that when people lie, they tend to look away from you or avoid eye contact. And their research doesn't indicate that avoiding eye contact is an indicator of deception at all. But it's a strong belief that a lot of people have, and people may rely on that or use that in relationships. Look me in the eye, or if you can't look me in the eye, assuming that someone's lying. So that's probably one of the largest misconceptions about lying.
That was one of my questions, actually, is do people look to the left when they lie? I feel like that's something people always say. And in relationships, I'm always like, where are they looking? Which way are they going?
That's right. And even, some of my earlier work, I was guilty of the same thing when I was looking at deception. I thought, well, as a counselor, as a clinical psychologist, we spend so much time training on nonverbal behaviors where we're looking at others' nonverbal body language. Are they looking away from us? Are they looking down? Are they hunched over? They seem interested. So I thought maybe counselors have a better a sense of when someone's lying, and they have better beliefs about this. But unfortunately, even psychologists, the work I did, they hold that same belief that when people lie, they look away. So we find that psychologists, we find that in other healthcare providers, we find that even in managers, so in the business world, the business industry, managers who think they can detect deception, they share that same belief that when people lie, they look away.
Are there signs that people can look for when people are communicating, whether it's verbal, physical? Like, is there something that we can do to identify people who are lying?
There's kind of two pieces to this, and the first one we'll start with, if you're okay with it, is what we'd call the laboratory research, right? So we talk about nonverbal behavior, so eye contact, talk about paraverbal and verbal indicators, so things like pitch. And so deception researchers will call these things cues to deception, or behavioral cues or nonverbal cues. And so there are, broadly, most nonverbal behaviors are what we call non-diagnostic. So they're not indicative of deception. So things like eye contact is non-diagnostic. Of nonverbal behaviors, there are a few, and they're also counter to what most people think, right? So that most people tend to think that when people are lying, they fidget and play with their hands and feet more than they actually do. So when people lie, they actually tend to control those behaviors more. So less hand fidgeting, less foot movement, and so forth. And so those are the only nonverbal cues that we'd say are diagnostic. And there's others. I mentioned pitch. Typically, people, when they lie, their pitch will increase. And once again, the caution with these cues is they're not telltale signs, right? So that our pitch can increase in other times when we're not lying. So if I'm real surprised, happy birthday, people surprise me, or let's say I'm real excited, my pitch is going to increase. And so that doesn't mean I'm lying either. So these are the findings we find within the lab. And so a lot of deception researchers, including me, we create these videos where we have in the video a participant tells the truth or a participant lies. And we bring research participants into the lab. They watch these videos and they have to decide, is that person lying or is that person telling the truth? And that's how we figure out, can they detect deception?
I'm curious, how good are people at determining if that person was lying or not?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for asking that. So what we find in all of these laboratory studies is that people, you and I, are really as good as flipping a coin. So we're not really much better than chance at detecting deception. So the rates look at about 54% accuracy of detecting deception.
Wow.
So not very good. And then the research has looked at, let's say, FBI, border agents, what we call special interrogators, people who might be trained to detect human deception. Even those individuals are not much better. Their percentages go from 54 to about 56. So not much better than chance.
Wow. I have to humble myself because I really feel like I'm a human lie detector, but I guess even the trained professionals are only getting about 56% accurate. So that's very interesting.
Well, you might be. You might be better than that.
Susie, your human lie detecting skills might exceed that of a professional. Dr. Drew said it himself, and we are your witnesses should you add that to your resume in the future.
The second part of this is that Timothy Levine, he's done some research with some others, basically that how we detect deception in the real world is not completely like we do it in the lab. And so that's the other piece here, right? That in the lab, remember I said you watch a video of someone who was informed to lie or tell the truth, and you're making a judgment about what you're watching and hearing. And so really you're asked to do a quick judgment. But in the real world, like if you're in relationships with people, you're constantly making quick judgments, but you're not making a definitive, in this moment, the person's lying or not. In the real world, we do it a little different, right? That most of the time we're looking for strategic evidence, or, in my clinical work, some of the patients I've seen, they come in and they say, I found out my significant other was cheating on me because I looked at their phone and found all these text messages, right? So you're detecting deception not just from watching a quick video of a person, but you're gathering evidence and information that's contrary to what you know. And the police do the same thing. They use what's called strategic use of evidence. They have evidence already before they ask questions or interview or interrogate someone. And many times they already know the answers, but they want to see, how do you respond? Are you going to respond differently than what I already know? And so we do that in relationships too. Parents will do the same thing, right? They have information about what their child has done or not done, but they bring them in and say, well, did you draw on the wall with that crayon? So it's you start off with some evidence, but then you're trying to elicit a confession. So that's how we do it in the real world. Or sometimes people just outright will confess. They say, I'm sorry, I've been lying to you about X, Y, and Z. And so that's how it looks in the real world, little different from the lab.
As you guys know, I'm a huge advocate for therapy. It's changed my life, made my life so much better. It's helped me navigate the challenges of being human in a much better way than I was several years ago. I was working a corporate job and money was tight. My expenses were kind of at their limits, and I felt like I could have benefited from therapy, but I couldn't afford it at the time. Which is why I'm so excited to talk with you guys today about Rula, who is one of our sponsors, because finding a therapist shouldn't be complicated or cost you a fortune. Rula connects you to high-quality, vetted, licensed mental health professionals, and the best part is that they take most major insurance companies. So instead of paying $100 or hundreds of dollars out of pocket, you could pay as little as $15. Go to Rula, see if this can be a resource to you, because it can be life-changing. And getting started is super easy. They ask you a few questions about what you're looking for in a therapist, like also things like insurance, what type of care you're looking for, and any preferences you have. And from there, Rula matches you with an in-network provider who fits your criteria. You can book your first session and start your journey to better mental health as soon as tomorrow. So head over to rula.com/live-laugh-lies to begin. That's RULA.com/live-laugh-lies. Because better mental health should be accessible, affordable, and easy. Thank you to Rula for sponsoring this podcast. So we actually asked people online what they would ask a lying expert, and this kind of made me think of one of the questions. Somebody wrote in and said, if I snoop on my partner and I find out information that they've been lying to me or cheating on me, and I have this information, is there a proper or healthy way to approach someone? Should you give them the opportunity to tell the truth, or do you think it's best? Is there a proven way that we should be navigating this in relationships?
Really great question, and I think it brings up several thoughts for me. One part of this question is someone who's, you said snooping within a relationship, right? So if you're snooping, it's likely that you're already suspicious, right? So that there's issues in the relationship about trust, right? So I would think about, what was it that motivated you to snoop? Is it that generally you're distrusting of others, or is it that you're distrusting of this person given some recent situations, right? So it's kind of two parts, right? And then many times if we're snooping and we find something, then we're justified. Now, what happens if you're snooping and you don't find anything, right? Who's in the right and who's in the wrong? And I think some of this comes into questions of morality. But from thinking from a relational standpoint or kind of counseling psychology, I think there's a value in a couple being honest and forthcoming. And I think many times it's difficult to have those conversations, but encouraging open communication and vulnerability and honesty, I think, are ways to do that. So it might be a confession of, I have been snooping and all that comes with that, and and this is what I found, and letting people share things, right? Because I think to your point, if you're snooping and you're waiting, then in some veins you might be being deceptive too by not telling the other person, here's what I did. I've been looking through your phone without telling you. So now you're you're committing the same kind of behavior, which can be, I could imagine, I don't know this to be the case, that if, that conversation happens, I was snooping and I found this however many weeks ago or a month ago or whatever, then the other person in a defensive stance might say something like, well, why were you snooping? Or, something defensively like that. Why did you not tell me about this? You were lying too. And generally that's probably going to create people to be more defensive and guarded rather than open and forthcoming.
Okay, so that leads to a personal question I have, which is, in childhood, I have this belief based on no science, no studies, nothing at all, but I think that when people are raised in an environment where there's like really harsh criticism or punishment, it can lead to people being more deceptive. Like, I was raised in a house where my family was so open, and it was like, if you make a mistake, like, there's going to be consequences, but don't make two mistakes. You need to call us. Like, if you're in high school and you're drinking, don't get in a car and drive, call us, because you're going to have way less of a punishment if you're honest. And if you are forthcoming, like, we will lessen the punishment. But if you get in a car and drive, then you're in trouble. Like, and I didn't even drink in high school. Like, I was a really very like well-behaved kid, but I grew up in this environment where I knew if I made a bad choice, I could always go to my parents. And I think it led to me being a very honest person. And I think when people are like really, really harsh or grew up in a really harsh environment, it can lead to people becoming good liars. Is there any truth to that you know of, or is that just completely falsified that I've made up and created in my head?
You bring up actually several relevant things that are important. I've done some work on this with colleague Chris Hart. We've done some research on personality traits associated with lying. And we found that there's a negative correlation with self-esteem and lying. So people who have a lower self-esteem tend to lie more. So that would corroborate kind of your hunch or your theory, right? That if people are being criticized in a way that's impacting their self-esteem, or you have a poor self-esteem, you'll see those individuals do tend to lie more. So that's related to that. The other part of what you're talking about, thinking about, honesty, and this is something that I've shared with many other people, where your parents are saying, if you're going to do this, we sometimes, we learn to be dishonest, and many times we can use dishonesty, in a way for impression management. If we want people to like us, we can use it to get something or to get out of something, get out of consequences. So we can lie because we don't want to get caught. What you said, drinking or doing whatever you're doing, you don't want your parents to catch you, so you can lie. And we can often, I think one of the things we often do is we couple those things together, a transgression with honesty. And we think, if I'm honest about doing something I wasn't supposed to do, there should be no consequence, right? So if, let's say you went out drinking and you weren't supposed to, and then you lied about it, you lied about it because you didn't want to get caught. But if you were forthcoming and said, hey, I was drinking, and your parents still get upset, well, why are you so mad? I was honest. Not that they're mad that you're honest. They're mad about, that you were doing this other thing they don't approve of. But we can kind of loop those things together. And so in our minds, we'll tell ourselves, or we'll justify deception in that way.
And you kind of mentioned personality traits in the process of answering that. Are there certain personality types that are known to be liars that we can look out for? Like, obviously, I feel like narcissists are something that people talk about all the time, and it's probably an overused term on the internet, but I have to assume that narcissists kind of fall into that category. And are there other people as well, if that's a thing?
Yeah, talk about lying and in personality traits. There's in psychology what's called the dark triad, so traits of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. So all these features of people who are maybe manipulative or grandiose, think high of themselves, and so interesting as we're talking about people that might there's different types of people and different types of personalities where they lie, and there's also situational factors. Right? So some individuals who might have a grandiose sense of self or be narcissistic may lie to achieve a certain goal. The hard part to separate is sometimes they may say things that, you say, well, that's not objectively true, but maybe they believe it. So, for example, if someone, has narcissistic tendencies of saying, I'm the best person in the world, or let me say for me, this is the best tie in the world, I have the best looking tie, whatever. If I'm saying this, you say, well, that's a lie, or that's blatantly false. If I truly believe it to be true, say that doesn't count as a deception for what most deception researchers say. Rather, it's a belief that's related to narcissism, that individuals truly believe those things, right? That they believe they have such an inflated sense of self, they believe it to be true, even though others are saying, well, wait a minute, you're not the best, or you don't have the greatest tie. So it's important to separate those features. But you asked about other personality traits. What we find is that basically the more you lie, the lower self-esteem you have, the less open you are, less openness, less conscientious, less extroverted, and less agreeable, but more neurotic. And as we look at personality traits, that's what we found in some of our work.
Do you feel like there's ever circumstances where lying is morally acceptable?
I tend to take a position that if you can deliver truth, that's the position. Now, I don't think it's always the easiest position, but I think it tends to be morally the best situation. What I mean by that is we can often, when we lie, we often justify our lies as being the best source of action, right? So if you ask me, if you get a new haircut and you ask me, what do I think about it? And let's say I genuinely don't like your new haircut. I could say I lied to you because I want to spare your feelings or make you feel good. And so I could justify that lie. Some of the work I've done and some others on this is we call those white lies or benevolent deception. We actually find that in romantic relationships, the more white lies you tell, the less satisfied you are in your relationship. So it's actually counterintuitive that we tend to be less satisfied when we're telling more of those white lies. And so when we're lying, so if I were to lie about your haircut, that requires me to make a prediction about your feelings. So if I think, well, Susie's going to be hurt if I tell her I don't like her haircut, so I'm not going to tell her that. Well, your hair looks great, right? So it requires me to predict how you're going to feel. But maybe I could tell you what I really think and you don't feel how I predict. And that's where it gets really, really challenging. And that's why I kind of make the argument of being honest and forthcoming. If you'll allow me, one story related to that, I can share. My oldest son, when he was young, he was about 5 years old, we bought him a betta fish. And sadly, I read some about changing the water and so forth, and I had a bad thermometer or measure of the water temperature, and changed the betta, took him out of the tank, I put him back in. My wife and we woke up in the morning to our son's fish that was gray and lifeless, that his fish had died as a result of me in this poor instrument. And so we had this conversation, which probably many parents have had, about, do you run to the pet store, get a new fish, and lie to your children? You tell them the truth, right? And so my wife was thinking about, is this going to traumatize him? Is this going to cause grief and pain? And I had been doing a lot of work on parental deception at the time and found out children who deemed the best relationship with their parents rated their parents as most honest, being honest all the time. So I told her, I said, you know what, I'm just going to tell our son the truth. right? So what we were doing is we were playing a game of prediction. We're trying to predict if we lied to him or told him the truth, how he was going to feel. And so I told him the truth. I sat him down. I said, here's what happened. Here's what Dad did. Here's the outcome. We kind of gave him an opportunity to share what he felt. And I said, we can go get a new fish and we can bury this fish. We don't have, all these opportunities. And without missing a beat, he said, let's go to the pet store and get a new fish. Like, he was not traumatized or hurt or bothered or sad at all. And, so I think of that example. I think that's an example where you could lie to someone else, thinking it's going to do something that it actually, like, being honest worked just fine, that he wasn't emotionally scarred. And even part of me as a psychologist was, even if he was sad, that would have been okay. That would have been an opportunity for us to talk about hard things.
Yeah, that's actually a really great example. It sparked a memory for me, which is not as beautiful, but maybe a little bit more traumatizing from childhood. Not for me, but my brother was gifted a hamster by his best friend when we were like 6 or 7 years old. And that hamster died. And instead of telling the friend, my parents went and bought another hamster, but me and my brother knew. And for a significant period of time, we allowed this friend to believe that that was the hamster he bought my brother. And then one day my brother and this friend got into a fight, and my brother like threw that in this kid's face of like, the friend wanted to hold the hamster and was like, I bought you that hamster. I want to hold it. My brother was like, that's not even the one you bought me. And it was a huge deal. Like, it became a really devastating piece to their friendship. Of course, they were kids and they moved past it, but it definitely stuck out in my mind as something that kind of traumatized all of us. It was like a really big lesson for everybody of like, oh, we could have been honest and this couldn't have become a painful piece in this friendship. It could have been, like you said, an opportunity to discuss, life and death and making mistakes and forgiving people. Like, there's so many ways that could have been handled. But looking back now, I'm like, wow, that was kind of a horrible way to go about that, because you're then trusting a child to keep a secret from another child. And it is a funny thing to look back on, but now I'm like, oh, wow, that was kind of messed up that we did that. So I'm glad to have a positive story from your end of things. And it definitely will encourage me when I have children of my own to maintain an honest relationship with them.
Between both of our stories, I'm imagining the parents in the situation you're telling about, where it's, parents are, I don't think it's malicious, that they're genuinely thinking what's going to be best for the child. And in their mind, and that's where we justify the deception that if we withhold this is going to spare them from the emotional pain, right? Because when we love people and we care about people, we don't want to see them experience pain or crying and so forth. So we want to guard and protect people. So generally, like your story, I think it's with good intent, but that's the result.
Totally, with good intent. Now I feel like I've just unpacked something from my childhood where I'm like, wow, like I value the truth so much. And it's like bled into my relationships as well, where I'm like, I can't stand a liar. Like, is the biggest issue I've had is like, I can't move past lies. Now, after just having this conversation, I'm like, wow, this really stems back to my childhood and witnessing that hamster dilemma. But obviously these are, I guess, I don't know if I would say white lies, but they are not intentional lies to be deceitful or hurtful. But I do want to talk about pathological lying and what distinguishes pathological lying from everyday dishonesty.
Yeah, of course. So pathological lying essentially is individuals who tell excessive amounts of lies, and their lies cause them problems in functioning, typically in relationships. It cause them pain, feeling distress, and typically puts themselves or others in danger. And so that's what is different from normative lying. So it's a certain frequency of lies. They're telling more lies than most people in a given day. And their lies are, once again, impairing functioning, causing distress, and putting themselves at risk for some danger. And so that's the marker. And there's a group called prolific liars too. These individuals also tell excessive lies but their lies aren't necessarily causing them problems in living. And so you could think of, people where lying tends to advance their career maybe. So in certain businesses and certain vocations where lying makes them more successful or doesn't really pose a problem for them. They compartmentalize lying for the vocation or something to that effect.
And are people that are pathological liars, do you think they're born this way? Do you think there's something in their brain that's different? Or do you feel like most of the time it's nurture over nature?
Yeah, nature-nurture question. This is a prime question in, one of the classes I teach at the university on psychological disorders. And usually it's a combination of both. For pathological lying, we haven't really dug in deep enough to look at all the kind of causal factors. The closest we've gotten, I've done some work recently with Chris Hart and Victoria Tawar, Dr. Tawar and Dr. Hart, and we've looked at an adolescent group of a sample of pathological liars, and we find that basically they have an executive functioning deficit, and that's kind of related to the story I was telling you earlier about when we lie, often there's a prediction of outcome. Right. Timothy Levine says the reason we lie is because the truth doesn't work. And so, what he means by that is we lie because we think if we are honest, it's not going to work out as well, right? If I tell you I don't like your hair, you're going to be upset. But if I tell you I love your hair, even though I don't, which honestly, I like your hair, I think it's fine.
Thank you.
It's not a lie. I think it looks fine. So I'm just using that as an example. Haircuts tend to be
Appreciate that.
Haircuts tend to be things that people may lie about. My haircut, right? But
hey, you're killing it.
so when people that lie, they're trying to predict an outcome. What we see with adolescents who are pathological liars, they have a deficit in executive functioning, and executive functioning is part of the brain where it's associated with the frontal part of the brain where we're thinking of, it's all the aspects of thinking and planning for the future, right? And so these individuals have a diminished capacity for that. So they're almost lying impulsively in the moment without thinking about the future or without thinking about the consequences.
Interesting. Do they feel remorse or guilt afterwards?
Yes.
Typically?
Yes. And that's we were talking about myths and misconceptions earlier at the onset about lying. That's one of the misunderstandings about pathological lying. So when pop culture uses the term pathological or compulsive liars, many times we think of people who are cold, calculated, really sneaky and out to manipulate and hurt others. All the work I've done on individuals who are pathological liars, they are remorseful. They struggle. And many times, that they've told me in the moment, I feel anxiety, and then I lie, and my lie reduces the anxiety. But then, hours or days later, they keep ruminating or keep thinking, why did I lie about that? Oh, that's such a stupid thing to lie about. And they do feel guilt from doing that.
That kind of gives me some peace. Not that I want people to walk around feeling guilty, but I think sometimes when you're on the receiving end of that, sometimes it feels like people that have put us in these situations, it's like, oh my gosh, there's no remorse, there's no empathy, no sympathy. And it's like, it feels like you're just the victim of somebody's, poor decisions and they don't seem to care. But then I think a lot of times with pathological lying, you just have to keep digging that hole deeper. And I've found that it just ends up ruining relationships in the end, is what it seems like. I don't know that there's a way out of it. Do you think that there's hope for pathological liars, or people dating a pathological liar? Is there hope? Is there room for growth? Or is this something that people just suffer with and navigate for the rest of their lives?
Well, you're asking that question to a counseling psychologist, so of course I think there's always hope for change of human behavior. That's the business I'm in, is that hope for people to change. And I write about that in the pathological lying book, in the last chapter, talk about recommendations for treatment and recommendations for change. That there certainly is hope. It's as we talked about earlier, some of this is modeling how to be honest and modeling hard conversations, right? How do you be honest even if it isn't what you want to do, or even though it may hurt someone's feelings? How can we have honest conversations? That's a big part of it. There's some other techniques, talk about differential reinforcement of other behaviors. So in the capacity where you can ignore the deception and reinforce honesty. Often in relationships, when people are doing what they're supposed to be doing or doing what we expect them to do, like we rarely praise that, right? So how many times have you been praised for being honest today, Susie?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, I'm going to do it now. Thank you for being honest with me. I appreciate that. Right?
And thank you. Thank you for being honest with us.
Of course. Thank you. So like when you think through your days and relationships you've been in, right, it almost sounds kind of funny. We're laughing at it, right? How awkward or weird would it be to, tell someone, thank you for being honest? We don't say it because we just expect that in relationships. But when someone lies to us, that gets a lot of attention. We talked about that a little bit earlier, I think, in between some things, that deception gets a lot of attention because it brings all the other emotions. How could you do this? Why could you do this? So really, we want to kind of be thoughtful about reinforcing the things we want, which is honesty. And to the capacity where we can, we want to maybe ignore or not give attention to the deceptions. Not ignore. Sometimes that's going to be hard. I think having healthy conversations about the reasons why someone would want to lie, I think it offers a great value as well.
That's good insight. So I asked my followers their questions, and I've gotten to that section of my document. So I have a few kind of all over the place questions, and one of them that jumped out to me is, do pathological liars believe their own lies, or do they have trouble deciphering fact from fiction?
Yeah, another great question. So with belief of lies, so kind of based on, I'm going to back up, a definition of a lie and deception, what most deception researchers use, including myself, is it's a deliberate attempt to create a false belief in another that the communicator doesn't believe to be true. So essentially, I don't believe something, but I want someone else to believe differently. That would be a lie, right? So so that's the position. So if I'm believing something that's false, we wouldn't say that's a lie. And that's important for my work with psychological disorders, because it separates pathological lying from, let's say, things like memory problems, Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury, schizophrenia, or any kind of psychosis. And to kind of put this out and kind of give you an example of that, let's say someone has schizophrenia and they tell you, the sky is green, and the sky is not actually green, and you look up and you're like, what? They're lying to me, right? You could say they're lying to you. But if that person actually believes the sky to be green or sees it that way, it is not a lie, because they're communicating to you what they see or what they believe, if that makes sense. And so someone with a memory problem, the same thing, they could say something that's factually incorrect, but they believe it to be true. We wouldn't say that's a lie.
Interesting. That brought up two things personally, where I'm like, okay, I think that there's been times in relationships where a partner and I are recalling an event that occurred, and we both have very different experiences of what reality is. And I think that there have been times in different relationships where I got to at one point with a relationship where I was like, I think we just are truly interpreting the experiences we're having so differently. Like we're both bringing our bias into this, and we are neither one of us are lying. And then there's been experiences in other relationships where I've felt like this person knows what happened and they are gaslighting me. They're trying to make me question my own reality despite the fact that they know what happened. They're repeating this and recalling this in a way that's completely different, in a way to manipulate me. And then the other thing that kind of came up for me when you were giving the definition of lying is the debate of, is the omission of the truth lying? And based on the definition you gave, I feel like that kind of solves that question to that debate, where it's like, yeah, if you're painting a picture to give the illusion of something that is not the reality, then even if you didn't physically or verbally speak a lie, it's still a lie.
That's right.
It's still deception.
That's right. Yeah, me and other deception researchers would say that. We call that, deception of omission, and it counts as deception. And I think most of the time when people ask, does this count? Usually it's a justification of the lie. Does this really count? Another example of does it count would be half-truths, right? If I tell someone partial information that's true, but not the entire situation, does that count? And in fact, deception researchers, including myself, we say that's a lie too. That's a deception, because you're still not giving the complete picture. You're withholding information to make someone believe something different. An example of that, let's say you're talking about cheating or romantic relationships. You tell someone, someone goes home and tells their significant other, I had a full day at work and then I went to go have lunch at this place, but they withheld that when they went to lunch they had intimate lunch with someone they worked with or something like that. Then that clearly was a lie. You withheld.
Oh, wow. For me, I'm like, this is triggering all my past messy relationships. It's all coming up for me. But it's really interesting. Another question somebody had was, why do people continue to lie when there's physical proof and evidence that goes against what they're saying?
There can be a couple different reasons for this. For pathological lying, there's, once again, this lack, from what we found in our research, this lack of kind of forethought. So impulsively still perpetuating the story. In fact, there's someone I had worked with who had done this, and started a seemingly innocuous lie with not feeling very well, which led to staying home from school, which led to doctor's appointments, which led to seeing a therapist, which led to lying to a therapist for over a couple of years. So this lie that begets the lie that begets the lies. For people that aren't pathological liars, I think there's this tendency to be defensive or to not think of ourselves as liars, or right, that if you're in the corner, you still want to maybe try everything to not fully confess or admit. And I think that's why some people will still lie even when things are made known. There's feelings of embarrassment or shame or whatever that is, and they may then create more lies to try to get out of that feeling.
Okay. Do you believe that people can build healthy relationships with people who have lying tendencies?
Well, I think we all have lying tendencies. I think all humans, since about the age of 2.5 to 3, start telling lies. Thankfully, while I study deception and honesty, thankfully, the default position for most humans is truth. Most people are honest most of the time. And so out of this whole podcast, the whole story, I think it's always good to remind ourselves that most people are honest most of the time. When we're looking at prolific liars, pathological liars, that's a subset, that's a smaller group of the population. And they tend to stand out in our minds because we get hurt, right? Anytime we get lied to by people we care about, it causes us a lot of pain and hurt. And so that stands out in our mind more than all the honest times and all the honest conversations. All right, so the redemptive picture for me is that most people are honest most of the time. All humans have the propensity to lie. With that, we're honest most of the time, and if we can facilitate more honest relationships, I think you can do that through willingness to be vulnerable, to share hard truths, in a way with good intents, where you're not trying to be brutally honest and harming others, but I think, like in therapy or in personal relationships, people are willing to hear hard truths if they know your intent isn't to harm them. Susie, if you think I have the best intent for you, you might be really willing to hear what I truly think about X, Y, or Z. You could ask me and really be willing to hear what I thought, even if it wasn't what you wanted to hear, if you thought my feedback was with your best intent in mind.
So I feel like a lot of it comes back to their intention, and like what is the reasoning behind the way they're communicating, which I feel like kind of comes back to the stuff with my childhood that I think through with my parents, where it's like, if there's this desire to be honest and to be truthful about whether it's what you're doing or what you're feeling, like I've always believed that my parents had the best intentions for me and me for them. And I feel like that's really allowed for there to be open communication in our relationship, because I feel like they can give me a hard truth when I need to hear it, because I know that it's not to sabotage me or to hurt me or to bring me down. Like, my parents are the most uplifting people. So it is like interesting to hear that, because I feel like people can hear hard truths if they're open-minded and if they trust the person that it's coming from. So that's really good insight, I feel like. With it being 2025 and social media just being at the center of our culture and our society, do you feel like you guys have to factor that into your research now? And have you already started looking at how social media has affected, I guess, the culture around lying? Like, is it something that you guys are looking into? Do you think society's become more open-minded or accepting of lying in certain contexts?
It makes me think of two things. I've done several of these interviews, news interviews and podcasts, and one question that I've gotten not too long ago is this idea of, with politicians and politics and elections, and usually deception and honesty comes out when you look at political elections. People are very interested in this conversation. But the question of, is it more acceptable to lie now than ever? Acceptability, deception since the dawn of time, from religious text or secular text, it's always been morally, deserving of death. Whether you're looking at secular text or religious text, it's always been a bad thing. In fact, even psychological research, looked at different traits of people, different labels, and one of the worst labels that people wanted was liar. Liar falls at the very bottom of this list, that no one wants to be called a liar. The acceptability is something I'm very fascinated with, right? And I think it's not a one-way street. We're always much more, we're kind of hypocrites in this way. We're more acceptable of lies if we're the ones telling the lies than on the receiving end. We've seen that in a lot of our research on relationships, parental relationships, intimate relationships, that I don't want anyone to lie to me, but it's okay if I tell others lies to protect their feelings.
That's actually so true. And funny you bring it up. I feel like people will resonate with that, because I feel that way too. Like, and I don't consider myself a liar. A lot of times in this show, we ask our guests, like, what is the worst lie you've told? That's like a funny thing. And so many people are like, I'm not a liar. And I'm like, that was my answer too when I had to answer it. Like, I'm not a liar. But I think at the end of the day, we all do have these tendencies to do these little white lies, whether it is to spare someone's feelings or just to show up for a friend when they need you to take their side on something. So I think we're all a little guilty, but yeah, I never want anyone to lie to me.
I think it's time we face the music. We're all just a bunch of little liars. But hey, at least we have each other.
So as a psychologist now, how do you handle clients or subjects that you're studying who lie during therapy? And is there a point where lying becomes a barrier to their healing?
How to handle lying, kind of some of what I've already shared, if you can model truth-telling behavior even when it's hard. Therapy is a different situation in some capacities than relationships where the expectations are different. Other than with the intimate relationships or social relationships, most people go to therapy with the expectation that I'm going to reveal stuff to someone who doesn't even know me, and it's going to remain confidential. So because of those expectations on the onset, people are generally more forthcoming. Not always, though, and some of my research has looked at this, that people lie in therapy as well. In fact, somewhere between 86 to 93% of people who have been in therapy have lied to their therapist at least once. But the same trend, most of them are not lying often or all the time with their therapist. And in fact, when they lie to their therapist, back to the good intent, they're lying to their therapist with a good intent, right? They're saying something like, you're really helping me, or I really enjoy our time together, or this is really effective, right? So they're actually lying to their therapist to make their therapist feel good. So I think any way you can model and encourage honesty. I think when people are dishonest, I think if you can make them aware of that and truly try to understand the function of that. So as therapists, we're humans first and foremost. So when people lie to us, the tendency is to be defensive and upset and angry. Why'd you lie to me? But one of the better recommendations is to kind of detach from that and think about questions like, what's the function of the lie? Why did this person feel the need to lie to me? Was it they don't trust me? They want me to think something specific about them? But really engaging in these conversations about the function of why they would lie to you. And what does that mean? What was the reason you wanted to lie to me?
Well, I wanted to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can find you, the titles of your books, and if there's anything that you want to leave people with, I want to give you the opportunity to share whatever message you might have for them.
Sure, yeah. If you want to look for me, drewacurtisphd.com. I've got links to my work, my research, podcasts, things I've done, books as well. So all that's there, all social media and so forth. You can find that there. Enjoyed the conversation. I'm passionate about this topic and could speak for hours and days about it, and really enjoyed my time with you today, Susie. And you've been a great joy to talk to, and I've enjoyed the time. And the questions you've asked have been different and fun and enjoyable from other questions. So I really enjoyed this.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for taking time to come out here and talk with everybody. I feel like people are really excited about this episode and to hear everything that you shared with us today. I feel like I got my questions out. The viewers got their questions answered. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Of course. Yeah, thank you.
This podcast has been brought to you by Podcast Nation.